In the world of Massachusetts politics, it's an article of faith that this state is exceptional, with a past and present that can't be beat. Here's then Governor Charlie Baker back in 2017 after U.S. News named Massachusetts the country's best state.
We have a lot of really smart people. We have a lot of great schools. That has led to a whole series of terrific, what I would call ecosystems around technology and healthcare and finance and education, and you put it all together, and in this day and age, in this kind of global economy and global world we live in, it's a terrific mix.
And here's now Governor Maura Healey in her inaugural speech back in January.
Our nation was born here, not with a whimper, but with a spark of revolution, a hunger for something new and a demand for something better. We established the first public park, the first public library, the first lighthouse, rail, subway, first basketball game.
But according to a new poll from UMass Amherst and WCVB, for many residents, all those firsts might not be enough to make them stick around. The poll found that 4 in 10 of us have considered moving in the last year. And it's important to note the frustration and restlessness that number suggests cuts across a host of different demographic groups. The findings come as Healey and others are pushing tax cuts aimed at making Massachusetts more desirable, but they also drive home just how much more might need to be done. Joining me to discuss are political scientist Tatishe Nteta, the director of the UMass Poll, and my colleague Katie Lannan, who covers the State House for GBH News. Tatishe, Katie, good to see you both. Tatishe, that 40% number, 4 in 10 number, is pretty striking in its own right, but there are some groups in which thoughts of relocation are even more prevalent. Who jumps out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the central story regarding our findings is that Republicans and conservatives and Trump voters really express high levels of dissatisfaction with living here in the Commonwealth. For Republicans, I believe it's over half of Republicans have contemplated moving, and 6 in 10 conservatives and Trump voters. And so it indicates that there is a incongruence likely between the politics of the state and the politics of Republican and conservative and Trump voters. I think that's one factor, but I think there are a number of other factors which can explain it, including high costs in particular.
A couple groups that jumped out at me: independents, 47% have thought about it. People earning less than $40,000 a year, 46%. Also, I believe 43% people of color and 42% people who went to grad school. So a really diverse mix of people who are discontented.
Yeah, I think, there's a number of factors which lead all those different demographic groups to consider leaving the Bay State. I think, as I indicated previously, I think that the increasing costs of living here in the Bay State are having an impact on people's decisions regarding their future. And that's particularly true of working class folks. In terms of people of color, the Bay State is not necessarily the most diverse state, and a number of respondents indicated a belief that there's an incongruence with the culture of the Bay State and the lack of diversity here in the Commonwealth. And so I think there are a number of factors which explain this increasing discontent that folks are expressing. Whether or not that discontent actually leads them to leave the state, I think is going to be one of the central questions moving forward.
Katie, the findings from Tatishe and his colleagues come as the question of whether the state should cut taxes and how it should cut taxes is dominating the State House, from what I can tell from the outside. The House just rolled out their tax cut plan this week. How does it stack up to what Governor Healey proposed doing a few weeks ago?
It's pretty similar, and I think both from House leadership and the governor, you hear that narrative of wanting to cut across all income brackets, all kind of swaths of the population. So both have a tax credit for families with dependents, whether that's children, seniors, people with disabilities. There are breaks for renters, for seniors who need help paying property taxes. There's some more business-friendly measures that have including
The short-term
capital gains
being cut from 12% to 5%
exactly,
in
big
both,
rate
if I
cut
remember
there.
right.
Yep, and the House also added in a simplification for how some corporate taxes are calculated, the single sales factor. The estate tax is a big component of both. Each want to raise the threshold where that tax kicks in. In the House's plan, it would be at $2 million. The governor's plan has 3, which is obviously higher than 2. And
I'm going to count on my fingers to fact check you
absolutely,
here.
journalist math, right? And
totally.
the House plan has a few things the governor's plan didn't, including a bump up in the earned income tax credit for lower income households.
Now, tell me if I've got the details right here. Is it in the House's plan or out of the House's plan? This discussion about how to refund money if the state takes in more tax revenue than it should, is that in their plan or is that a separate piece?
That's in the House plan, correct. And that was the surprise rebates last year, $3 billion that went out to taxpayers. The House wants to, rather than have that be proportional based on how much you paid in taxes, have it be an equal amount. They're casting it as a matter of fairness.
And that would be redistributive, and critics have already said that that might not pass constitutional muster,
Right.
So tax cuts obviously are one way to bring down the cost of living, which, as Tatishe said, was the dominant concern voiced by people in this poll. But there's other ways to go at this. You can work on the cost of childcare, which I remember when my kids were in daycare, preschool, was absolutely brutal. You can work on the cost of housing, finding some way to try to bring it down or at least keep it from going up as fast as it has been. Are there any significant steps in those or other areas brewing on Beacon Hill right now?
Yeah, there's a major bill that aims to make childcare more affordable for families and more sustainable for the providers, keep people in the field because they're earning very low salaries. The math isn't working on either side of that equation. Governor Reilly is moving to create a housing secretary, which seems like something that'll be in place fairly soon being relative in Beacon Hill terms, but there's motion there. And a lot of what we're seeing is these kind of big conceptual moves, but in terms of direct policy actions, we're really focused on the budget and tax relief on Beacon Hill right now.
Yeah, I actually want to talk with both of you a little more about that. Tatishe, when you talked to all respondents in this poll, you asked them what they thought the biggest challenge was, the biggest issue was facing the state. And I want to bring up the word cloud that created, because I'm a big word cloud fan, but also because in the graphic that you created, housing was so clearly above all other concerns. You see costs there, taxes, inflations, affordable, but housing just dominates everything else. For me, that raises a question. If housing is such a predominant concern, why do you think, as someone who watches the legislature, watches the governor and how they interact with each other, why is tax cuts, or why are tax cuts the focus of the Beacon Hill conversation right now? Why aren't Governor Reilly and the legislature just saying, we need to do everything possible as soon as possible to tackle housing production and housing costs?
Yeah, I think it's a reflection in some ways of one of the central concerns that the governor has expressed and a number of folks in the legislature have expressed as well, which is this issue of competitiveness and the belief that there's a large swath of the public, particularly wealthier folks in the state who are potentially leaving. And they always reference that 110,000 figure in a sort of post-COVID Massachusetts. And there's a large belief that the reason they're leaving is the sort of tax issues that Massachusetts has become well known for. You know, we're known outside of the boundaries and within as Taxachusetts. And so this is, I think, one of the ways in which both the governor and the legislature want to attack that issue of competitiveness to preclude people from leaving the state. But it doesn't necessarily comport with where most of the folks in the state are. They really care about housing. We also asked, what do you want to tackle? What do you want the governor to tackle in her first year? And housing overwhelmingly was the issue. And so this seems like a, again, incongruence between what constituents want the governor and the legislature to attack first and what they are actually attacking. And so whether or not that's going to have electoral consequences is going to be a story going forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. Katie, I know you've been working on this protracted project that we've been doing with various partners, trying to get voters to tell us what they're concerned about. What's your take on why housing is not front and center for the legislature and the governor, why it is tax cuts? I don't know if you have a similar analysis to Tatishe or part ways with him at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one thing that needs to be considered whenever you're talking about why Beacon Hill isn't doing anything on any particular issue is that they need to get, and because they try to pass most things either unanimously or overwhelmingly, there's 200 people who
good
have
reminder.
a say in this one way or another. So one of the things that complicates housing policy in particular is how do you address the needs of somewhere like Boston, of the, inner suburbs of that area, with rural communities out west, with, tourist hotspots on the Cape and Islands, central Massachusetts, gateway cities, all of which have different, they all have housing problems, but they all kind of manifest differently, and there's different policy levers that could be pulled. So I think there is it's a hard time to get consensus when every district might want something a little different.
That is a good point, and also a little bit disheartening because the problem seems so acute, and it makes me wonder whether we'll be able to come up with solutions that are adequate to its scale. Tatishe, you also asked people when they said they were thinking about moving, have been thinking about it in the past year, where they were thinking about moving. And it's word cloud time again, because this one was striking. Many options, but one clear winner once again, and that would be the great state of Florida. Florida, of course, under Governor Ron DeSantis, has been going really hard right. Is it possible that the number of people who said they're thinking about moving to Florida suggests, among other things, that politics are less important than other issues when people think about where they're going to be able to build a life?
Yeah, I think, there's a number of factors which influence the location that people want to move to. I think one of the factors, of course, is just weather. And a number of respondents indicated that they were looking for a warmer climate. Taxes are also a factor, given the fact that the state of Florida does not have income taxes. But also, I think there are a number of folks who are growing tired, at least in terms of the perceived progressiveness of the state. And they find that they are not necessarily welcome in the state as they previously were. So I think a number of issues lead folks to think about Florida. And of course, there's a strong network of Massachusetts residents in the state of Florida. This has been a location that folks have decided to retire to or move to for decades. And so I think all those factors mix together to keep Florida as the number one spot for those who are contemplating to move.
I will say my in-laws used to live in Florida. They now live here. And when we would go down there once a winter, it was amazing the extent to which it could transform my mood and outlook on life for like a month or two. Katie, do you think the fact that so many Massachusetts residents, again, of all walks of life, all stripes, are considering going somewhere else, do you think that it might kickstart the legislature a bit and get them to be as deliberative as they are, as many different interests as they have to balance? You think it might make them act with a little more alacrity than we usually see?
Well, I do think the calendar on Beacon Hill is a problem when it comes to any sense of urgency, because right now for the next couple of months we're going to be focused mostly on the budget and not other big policy items. Although those tax cuts, when we hear about them, we do hear policymakers talking about the concern of people moving away, of the state becoming less attractive to businesses. One of the questions that it's not clear there's a wide degree of agreement in the legislature is on who's moving away. Is it companies? Is it businesses? Is it the wealthy? Or is it people who can't afford the cost of living, who can't afford childcare, who can't have housing? We've also seen people like Governor Reilly and Boston Mayor Michelle Wu trying to position the state as almost a counterpoint to Florida, saying, oh, it's our values that make it attractive here. That came up this week in the discussion around medication abortion. Maybe people from other states might want to think about relocating to Massachusetts because of the politics here, at least according to people who, are in charge of setting those politics.
Yeah, I remember, didn't Governor Baker, back when he was in office and Roe was reversed, didn't he suggest that we might be the beneficiaries of a shift like that?
Yeah, that's been kind of a running thread, is that, Massachusetts is a welcoming place to people who hold the same values of those in charge of the state. And I guess that does, as the polling from UMass indicates, kind of cut both ways.
Tatishe, last word to you. Are there questions that you want to dig into along these lines in future polls to see how this stuff is playing out?
Yeah, I mean, there's always questions that I want to ask that I'm not able to include in the poll. But I really think digging into this question of competitiveness is really an issue here, like whether or not there is the real exodus of folks from the state. Again, a lot of people consider leaving. I've always said I consider leaving after one of those really bad blizzards.
Yep.
But is this really, are people acting on this particular viewpoint? Do they know of folks that have left the state? I think those are really good pieces of evidence that can indicate whether or not this fear that is really influencing the legislature and the governor actually has any strong evidence in support of it.
All right, Tatishe Nteta, Katie Lannan, thank you both.